We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Beis and Aleph Mesechet Shekalim. This is Shekalim Daf 22a. The Mishnah here is continuing with two more opinions about what happens when you have the meat of Kachei Kachim. Those are the holiest kinds of karbanos, including karbanos like karban ola, karban chatos. So what happens when you have tumah in such a situation? Do you burn it in the azara, outside of the azara? Rabbi Eliezer says, Shenitma bi'ava tumah. If it becomes tameh with an ava tumah, meaning a strict form of tumah, bein bifnim, bein bachutz, it doesn't matter, according to Rabbi Eliezer, where the meat became tameh, whether it was inside the azara, whether it was outside of the azara. Yisaref bachutz, you always have to burn it outside of the azara, because that there we're dealing with real tumah. Shenitma bivlada tumah, but if it became tameh just by a rishon, a lower form of tumah, so then bein bachutz, bein bifnim, again, it doesn't matter, according to Rabbi Eliezer, where the tumah occurred, whether it was outside the azara, whether it was in the azara. Yisaref bifnim, in those cases, you burn it within the azara. Finally, Rabbi Akiva says, Makom tumaso, sham treifaso. The rule is simple. Wherever the tumah occurs, that's where you burn the meat. And so the Gemara says, Bar Kapara says, Av hatuma dvar Torah. When the Mishnah says that the basar kachei kachim, the meat of kachei kachim, became tameh through an av hatuma, that refers to tumah midoraisa. And vlad hatuma midivreim. When the Mishnah says that it became tameh through a rishon latuma, it became tameh through a vlad hatuma, that meant it became tameh on a derabanan level. You can have situations where the meat would become tameh on a doraisa level from a vlad hatuma, and you can have situations where it becomes tameh on a derabanan level from a vlad hatuma. And Bar Kapar is saying the Mishnah is specifically referring to derabanan tumah. When it says vlad hatuma, it doesn't mean doraisa tumah; it means derabanan tumah. Rabbi Yochanan says bein zeh dvar Torah. Rabbi Yochanan says no. When the Mishnah says ava tumah and when the Mishnah says vlad tumah, all cases are doraisa level tumah. Vlad tumah is simply a lower level of tumah. So the Gemara now asks on Rabbi Yochanan, V'kasha de Rabbi Yochanan al de Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is difficult when you look at Beis Shammai in the Mishnah. How does Rabbi Yochanan reconcile his position with Beis Shammai? Why? To Beis Shammai Omrim, because Beis Shammai say, Hakol yisaref bifnim, in all situations you burn the meat of the kachei kachim inside the azara. Chutz mishenitma bi'ava tumah bechutz. With one exception, if it becomes tameh by an avatuma outside the azara, then you don't go and bring it into the azara. There, in that case, you're going to burn it outside the azara. Now, the problem is, if avatuma is doraisa and vladatuma is doraisa, why make a distinction? Ma bein avatuma b'chutz, ma bein vladatuma b'chutz. Why would Beis Shammai make a distinction between becoming tameh by an avatuma outside the azara and by becoming tameh by a vladatuma outside the azara? Zev v'zeh lo dvar Torah. Aren't they both doraisa? Why is it okay to take the vladatuma and bring it inside, but it's not okay to take the avatuma? And the Gemara says further, v'afilu al Beis Hillel lo mikshia. Even with Beis Hillel's opinion, isn't it difficult for Rabbi Yochanan? To Beis Hillel Amar, because what does Beis Hillel say? Hakol yisar b'chutz, that in all situations you should burn it outside the azara. Chutz ma shenitma b'vlad hatuma b'fnim, except if it became tameh by vlad hatuma, again the lower form of tumah, already inside the azara. Then you can burn it in the azara. So again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, ma bein vlad hatuma b'fnim, ma bein avatuma b'fnim. What's the difference between a vlad hatuma inside the azara and between an avatuma in the azara? Zev v'zeh lo dvar Torahu. Aren't these both doraisa? According to Rabbi Yochanan, if they're both doraisa, basically the question is, why would we ever make a distinction? So to that, the Gemara says, Lo havu bar Rabbanan, the Rabbanan did not discuss within Rabbi Yochanan, Ela al Dvar Kapara. They were only able to have a discussion within the opinion of Bar Kapara. In other words, no resolution to this question. We don't know how we answer Rabbi Yochanan with these shitas in the Mishnah. But the Gemara continues, V'kasha de Bar Kapara al de Beis Shammai. Even Bar Kapara's position, who says there is a distinction, that the avatum in the Mishnah is doraisa and the vladatum is Rabbanan, even Bar Kapara has difficulty with Beis Shammai's view. The Beis Shammai, because Beis Shammai say, Hakol yisaref b'fnim, everything is burned within the azara, chutz mishenitma bi'ava hatuma b'chutz, unless it became tameh by the tumah midoraisa outside of the azara. Then already you don't bring it into the azara, you burn it outside the azara. So the Gemara asks, Ma bein avatuma bein b'chutz bein b'fnim. What's the difference if it became tameh? We're talking about a real tumah here, a tumah doraisa. What's the difference if it became tameh outside the azara or inside the azara? Zev v'zeh lo dvar Torah. Aren't they both doraisa? Shouldn't you take something that is tameh outside of the azara? Why are you leaving it in the azara? So for that, the Gemara answers simply, Begin de Rabbi Akiva Amar, Makom tumaso sham teisreifaso. In this particular regard, Beis Shammai follow Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah said there's a rule, wherever it becomes tummy, you should just burn it over there. So in this regard, Beis Shammai follow that. Beis Shammai say that when it comes to something that's tummy by an avatuma, it really depends where it became tummy. You'll follow Rabbi Akiva's view in these situations. If it becomes tummy outside the Azara, then you're not going to go bring it in. But if it becomes tummy already in the Azara, so then you follow Rabbi Akiva, makom to maso, in the place where it becomes tummy, that's where you burn it. And the Gemara asks further on Bar Kapara, Ve'afilo al de Beis Hillel lo mikshi. Is it not a question even within Beis Hillel's opinion? The Beis Hillel Omer, because what does Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel say, HaKol Yisaref b'chutz. Everything needs to be burned outside the Azara. Chutz mishenitma bevlad atuma b'fnim. Again, except for the most lenient situation. If it became tameh by a vlad atuma and it's already within the Azara, so then you burn it inside. So again, the same question. Ma bein vlad hatuma, bein bifnim, bein bachutz. What's the difference if it's only a derabanan tuma? Who cares if it's inside the azar at the time it becomes tameh, or outside of the azar? Just bring it back in to burn it inside. Zev v'zeh lo midivreimu. Aren't they both just tuma midrabanans? There's such a lenient tuma, you should be able to bring it inside, even if it becomes tameh outside of the azara. So to that, the Gemara answers, begin to Rabbi Shimon Amar. This is because of the sheet of Rabbi Shimon. What does Rabbi Shimon say? He says, Macholo umashko shel mitzora mishtalchin chutz l'shalosh machanos. Now the Gra over here has a different gear, so we'll take a look. Hachi garsinan macholo umashko shel mitzora means to say the food and the drink that a mitzora touches ein mevian legimel machanos. Instead of mishtalchin, he has mevian. You don't bring that into the three machanos, meaning even though if a mitzora were to touch machal and mashke, you would not necessarily send it out of the machana. You wouldn't say that's the kind of thing that has to be sent out of the city. But in terms of bringing it in, if it's already outside, you're not going to go bring it in. As the Gra explains, V'achi Perusha, begin Domer Rabbi Shimon Ochlin u'mashkin shel mitzora ein meviin legimel machanos. Just like Rabbi Shimon says, you're not going to go bring it into the three machanos. So therefore, the same thing over here. If it already became tameh outside the azara, in our case of the kachei kachim, even if it's just a low level of tameh midrabanan, ein meviin lifnim. You're not going to go out of your way to bring it inside. Gra then says here, Reb Shimon Zel lo matzasi mekomo. I don't know exactly where this Reb Shimon is, and then he goes on to say a pshat. V'nira de Reb Shimon l'taime ozil. It could be that Reb Shimon is following his opinion somewhere else. To v'sof parakama dekelim betosus Reb Shimon Omer kishem she'ein zavos v'nidos v'yoldos nichnasan l'harabayis kach mishkavan u'moshavan kayotze behen. Just like they don't enter, so too their mishkav u'moshav. V'achinami b'mitzora ochlin shelo shenitzmu mimenu. Maybe it's the same thing as that particular case over there. And then he notes, "V'girsas hasvarim mishtalchin shibushahu." He says the girsa that we have of sent out is a mistake, and he goes on to explain why that girsa does not make sense. So in any case, the point over here is that Beis Hillel will hold like Rabbi Shimon, that even though if it's already in the Azara, fine, it's a low-level tumah, it's not a problem to burn it in the Azara, but to go and bring it into the Azara, something that's already outside of the Azara, that they're not going to do, similar to what Rabbi Shimon says, by the Maichel and Mashke of a Mitzora. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, a Vore HaTamid, the limbs of the carbon Tamid, Nitanin mechatzi kevesh ulamata. So before they brought them up to the Mizbeach, they would place them on the ramp that went up to the Mizbeach, but they would put it on the lower half of the ramp, b'mayriv on the western side of the ramp. Shal musaf, in the limbs of the carbon musaf, nitanin mechatzi kevesh ulamata. Those would be placed on the lower half of the ramp, but b'mizrach they would be placed on the eastern side of the ramp. Shal Roshei Chodashim, when you had the karbonos of Rosh Chodesh, nitanin al karkov hamizbeach milamalan. Those were put on the karkov of the mizbeach, up on the top. The karkov of the mizbeach ran between the corners of the mizbeach. It was the outer part of the mizbeach. Hashkolim v'habikurim eina nohagen el b'fnei habayis. The Mishnah says that the din of shekel, the machatz shekel, and also the halachas of bikurim, they only applied when there's a Beis Hamikdash. Once there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no din of shekel, there's no din of bikurim. Aval meiser dagon u'meiser behema uvechoros, but the halachas of meiser when it comes to grain, the halachas of meiser behema, giving the 10th animal, also making that kodesh, the halachas of bechor, that the bechor is kodesh, nohagen bein b'fnei habayis uvein shelo b'fnei habayis. Those halachas apply whether there's a Beis Hamikdash or not. When it comes to the issues of meiser, those are tolui and kedushas haaretz. Bechor also, it's kodesh merechem. It doesn't matter whether there's a Beis Hamikdash. Hamakdish shkolim uvikurim, Now, if a person is makdish shkalim and bikurim bizman hazeh, even though there's no Beis HaMikdash, so is that going to have kedusha or not? Hareza kodesh, the Tanna Kama says it does have the kedusha. You have to basically, the shkalim, you can yolichem liyam hamelach, get rid of them. The bikurim, you let it rot. Rabbi Shimon says, ha'omer bikurim kodesh, einon kodesh. If a person says bikurim are kodesh, the kedusha is not chal. And the Gemara says, Ezo Charkov HaMizbeach. What do we mean when we talk about the Karkov HaMizbeach? Gemara explains, Amma bein Karen LeKaren. It refers to the outer Amma between the corners of the Mizbeach, meaning the outside Amma of the Mizbeach on the top. Mokom Hiloch Ragle Kohanim. That was the place where the Kohanim used to walk. They used to walk along the outside of the Mizbeach. Gemara now asks, Musvei Shabbos, Musvei Rosh Chodesh. Let's say you have two carbon musafs to bring. It's Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. You have the carbon musaf of Shabbos, the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Mikodem, which comes first? Which do you bring first? Rabbi Yirmiyah Savar Meimar Musvei Shabbos, Musvei Rosh Chodesh, Musvei Rosh Chodesh Kodmin. So Rabbi Yirmiyah thought to say that if you have both of these musafs, you should bring Rosh Chodesh first. Chayli de Rabbi Yirmiyah min Hadon. The proof to Rabbi Yirmiyah was from the following. It says, Shiro shal Shabbos, V'shiro shal Rosh Chodesh. What about the songs? The Levium sing the songs when the Karbanos are brought. So if you have a Shir of Shabbos and a Shir of Rosh Chodesh, it says that Shiro shal Rosh Chodesh Kodem. It says that the Shir of Rosh Chodesh comes first. So just like meaning you sing the song of Rosh Chodesh and you don't sing the song of Shabbos. So in the same way, you should bring the Karban of Rosh Chodesh first. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yosa Shan Yohi. It's Shan Yohi Tamon. It's different over there. There's a reason why we sing the song of Rosh Chodesh. The Amar Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Chia says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kedei lefarsamo lehodia ashu Rosh Chodesh. The reason why we sing the song of Rosh Chodesh is just to let everyone know that it's Rosh Chodesh. People might not be aware of the fact that the moon was seen. So the Gemara therefore explains, Keitzad Hayaosa, what would they do? Shochet Musvei Shabbos. They would actually shecht the Karban Musaf of Shabbos first. V'Omer Alein Shiro Shal Rosh Chodesh. And they would say the Shir of Rosh Chodesh. B'ram Hacham Musvei Shabbos and Musvei Rosh Chodesh. But when it comes to over here, your question of which Karban Musaf is brought first, Musvei Shabbos, Kodmin, it's going to be the Musaf of Shabbos that comes first. Al Shem Kol HaTadir Mechavero, Kodem Es Chavero. The rule is, anything that's Tadir, the thing that's more frequent, that comes first. And Shabbos is more frequent than Rosh Chodesh. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Shekalim Ubikurim V'chulu. Again, the Mishnah said that if a person is makdish shkalim, or if a person is makdish bikurim bizman hazeh, so then the hektish is going to be chal. And Rabbi Shimon said that the hektish is not going to be chal when it comes to bikurim. So the Gemara says, Hashkalim Kitsho. The mashmos of the Mishnah is that everybody in the Mishnah agrees, both the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah agree, that when it comes to shkalim, if a person is mekadesh the shkalim, it's going to have kedusha. The machlokus was by bikurim. Everybody agrees that the shkalim are going to have kedusha. And so the Gemara quotes a third opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Bein Elu uvein Elu, doesn't matter shekel, doesn't matter if it's bikurim, lo kidshu, there is no kedusha. So according to this opinion, by both situations, bizman hazeh, there's not going to be any kedusha. So the Gemara now says, Tani, it was taught, ger bizman hazeh. Let's say you have a ger nowadays. Now, during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, if a person would be megayer, he would actually bring 2 bird karbanos as a karbanola. So what does a ger do nowadays? So tzarach lahavi kino revius kesef. He needs to at least bring money, designate money. So when the Beis HaMikdash, a quarter of kesef, meaning a dinar, so that when there's a Beis HaMikdash, he'll use this money for the karbanos. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, Bittul Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that this is batel. We no longer do this. We do not have a ger bizman hazeh designate any money for a carbon because we're afraid there's going to be a stumbling block. In other words, maybe the person will then get personal benefit from the money, and that's already going to be me'ilah. You've designated the money for a carbon, and now you get personal benefit. That's me'ilah. We don't want a person to come to me'ilah. Gemara says, Ma'u mipnei atakala. What does it mean that there's a takala? Kada tatani. It's like that which was taught. Ein makdishin, v'lo marichin, v'lo machrimin, v'lo magbiin shumasu ma'isers bezban hazeh. You don't do any of these things. You don't make things kadosh. You're not marichin, which means you designate your value to the Beis HaMikdash. None of these kinds of kedushas you do. The Gra takes out this line about shumasu ma'isers. But the point is, you don't do it because why? Because you're afraid you might end up me'ilah. You might end up getting benefit from these things which are hektish. V'im hektish o herech o hechrim. And if you do so, if a person makes something kadosh, makes something hektish, o higbia hakisus tisarif habehema. Again, the Gra over here says that the o higbia is taken off. So the Mishnah says haksus haksus tisarif. So that garment, let's say, which you made hektish, you got to burn it. Habehema teyakir. The behema needs to be allowed to die. Now you can't kill the behema actively because it's kachim, but what do you do? Okay, it's not how do you allow the behema to die? Noel b'fanah adalas, you got to close the door in front of it. V'himei you let it die on its own. V'hamos, let's say there's any money that was designated for hektish, yelchul yam hamelach, it has to go to the yam hamelach. So the point is exactly this exact same point. We don't want you to be makdish things because it's going to come to a takala. And similarly, over here, when it comes to a ger, bisman hazeh, we don't want him to be makdish or designate any money for the karvan because, again, it's going to come to a takala. So the Gemara now says, avar v'hikdish min ma. So what's going to happen? Avar v'hikdish, what's going to be the halacha? Meaning, let's say the ger does go ahead and he says that he designates some money to have this kedusha for the karbanos. Is it going to be is it going to be hektish or not? So the Gemara answers, min ma dam Rabbi Shimon. We can answer this from what Rabbi Shimon says. What did Rabbi Shimon say? He said, bitl Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mivnei hatakala. He said that this idea that a ger should be makdish the money for his karbanos, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said it's a takala. Don't do it. So Hada Amr, that seems to imply Avar v'hikdish kitsho. That seems to imply that if he would make it kadosh, it would be kadosh because there's a takala. You shouldn't do it because if you make it hektish, there might be a takala. You might end up coming to meila. But that sounds like if you would make it hektish, it would be hektish. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yehuda and Sundaria, boy kumi Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda and Sundaria, he asked the following question in front of Rabbi Yossi, this following contradiction. Hacha'at, over here you say, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Beis Amud Beis.